to Vintage Tech Spotlight, your home for old radio commercials and unusually made records. And this record is 1970 Pepsi Cola radio commercials. There's the country western commercial, the gospel commercial, the folk commercial, and the Spanish commercials. And first up, we have a commercial by Johnny Cash. Then there's one by Tammy Wynette. The gospel version is by Odetta. The folk version is by Bonnie Dobson. And the Spanish version is by Mongo Santa Maria. So finally, that joke in Blazing Saddles makes sense.
Mongo Santa Maria.
One of the things that makes this record unusual is the fact that it has locked grooves, which means that between the tracks, the grooves are not continuous. You actually have to lift up the turntable and go from one track to the other. When these records were first released, they were the most common way for a company to distribute their commercials to a radio station. What would happen is these records would go out once a year, or again, maybe once a season, and a radio station would probably only use one, maybe two commercials from this record. It would be very unlikely for a radio station to use like the country western and the gospel one, for example. So the standard procedure was to record your particular commercial from the record onto a broadcast cartridge like this. That way it could be replayed over and over again without wear to the original recording. And now we're going to play the first track on this record. It's a Johnny Cash commercial, but it's a little more complicated than you actually think, because the first track on this, like all the tracks, is a locked groove, which means that even though you put the tone arm down, it's not going to advance to the next recording unless you manually pick up the tone arm and move it over. See, this has been going for several seconds now, and it will not start unless I actually lift up the tone arm and push it over slightly, and now we'll start.
Johnny Cash.
There's a whole new way of living. Pepsi helps supply the drive. It's got a lot to give to those who like to live, 'cause Pepsi helps them come alive. It's the Pepsi generation coming at you, going strong. Put yourself behind the Pepsi. If you're living, you belong. You've got a lot to live, and Pepsi's got a lot to give. You've got a lot to live, and Pepsi has got a lot to give.
And that was Johnny Cash's Pepsi commercial. And now I'm going to lift the tone arm up, scoot it on over a little bit, and let's hear Tammy Wynette's.
Here's Tammy Wynette.
There's a whole new way of living. Pepsi helps supply the drive. It's got a lot to give to those who like to live, 'cause Pepsi helps them come alive. It's the Pepsi generation coming at you, going strong. Put yourself behind a Pepsi. If you're living, you belong. You've got a lot to live, and Pepsi's got a lot to give. You've got a lot to live, and Pepsi's got a lot to give.
And now I'm going to move over to the third track with a little bit of gospel here from Odetta. And here we go. Let's bump that groove over.
Here's Odetta.
There's a whole new way of living. Pepsi helps supply the drive. It's got a lot to give to those who like to live, 'cause Pepsi helps them come alive. It's the Pepsi generation
And now let's hear the folk track on here, Bonnie Dobson doing her Pepsi commercial.
Miss Bonnie Dobson.
There's a whole new way of living. Pepsi helps supply the drive. It's got a lot to give to those who like to live, 'cause Pepsi helps them come alive. It's the Pepsi generation coming at ya, going strong. Put yourself behind a Pepsi. If you're living, you belong, you belong. You've got a lot to live, and Pepsi's got a lot to give. You've got a lot to live, and Pepsi's got a lot to give. You've got
And now the last commercial of the day is in Spanish, and this is Mongo Santa Maria doing his Pepsi commercial for 1970.
La gran banda de Mongo Santa María.
Hay un nuevo modo de vivir, Pepsi ayuda a reanimarlo. Pepsi alegra y reanima a los que les gusta vivir, porque Pepsi les da vida. Es la generación de Pepsi que llega y se impone. Impóngase con una Pepsi y tómele el gusto a la vida. Usted tiene mucho que vivir y Pepsi tiene mucho que dar. Usted tiene mucho que vivir y Pepsi tiene mucho que dar.
And that concludes today's episode of Vintage Tech Spotlight. Hopefully this has shed light on how commercials were distributed to radio stations back in the day. We've also talked about Pepsi so much, I think I'm going to have to go test my blood sugar. So until next time, click like and subscribe, and see you next time on Vintage Tech Spotlight.